Death, the inevitable end. But does everything truly end here? Or is death just a transition to something we don't understand? Today, we'll explore the terrifying truths shared by those who came back from death. Imagine this. Your heart stops, your mind fades away, your body is no longer yours. But something is there, pulling you into a deep void. Is it darkness, or is it light? Those who have returned from death tremble as they describe this moment. Some talk about a peaceful light tunnel, while others describe being pulled into an indescribable terror. Why? What did they see? Science tries to explain what happens at the moment of death, but some stories defy any logical explanation. Dark entities, an endless void, hellish images. The accounts of those who came back from death will haunt you. So, is death truly an end, or is it a much more terrifying beginning? If you have the courage to uncover the truth, subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's continue to delve into the depths of darkness together. What is NDE? Imagine this. For a moment, your life is over. Your heart stops. Your brain loses function. But somehow, you return. What really happened? What is the extraordinary experience shared by those who returned from death? Today, we'll explore the horrifying and intriguing truths told by those who crossed the threshold of death and came back. Many people describe traveling through a light tunnel after death, seeing their loved ones and leaving their bodies behind. But what does this really mean? Moving towards the light, feeling a sense of peace and security. What do these experiences symbolize? Maybe death isn't as final as we think. Perhaps it's a transition, a step into another dimension. NDE, near-death experience, is not just a physical process. It's also a spiritual discovery. Those who've experienced it say that it changed the way they see life, and they no longer fear death. But are these experiences merely hallucinations? Or is it proof of life after death? Today, we'll take a closer look at these mysterious journeys of those who returned from death. Brace yourselves, because some secrets might be too deep to ever be solved. What are the dead trying to tell us? What lies beyond death? Let's search for answers to these questions. Story 1. The Search for Peace. Jennifer's light tunnel experience. Jennifer, 30 years old, was a lively woman. She had a healthy, happy life. Until one day she suffered a horrific heart attack. In an instant, her world shattered. Hours of waiting at the hospital felt like a nightmare for Jennifer's family. However, this nightmare would bring much more, revealing a much deeper truth. One day, her heart stopped. Jennifer found herself on the threshold of death. But what she experienced in that moment was far too complex to be explained by science alone. When her heart stopped, she suddenly found herself in a dark tunnel. The end of the tunnel was uncertain, but there was something, a light. An endless light source was calling her. Moving forward, consciously stepping closer to it, was like being pulled towards it with every step. But Jennifer froze in fear. The light was drawing her in, but in that moment, she consciously felt the urge to turn back. Something felt wrong, but what was it? With her heart stopped, the tunnel gave Jennifer the chance to cross the boundaries of death. The peace, warmth, and sense of security enveloped her. But just as she thought everything was perfect, she noticed something. The light grew even brighter, and the warmth intensified as if the light was pulling her in. But at the same time, her inner fear grew stronger. Seeing such a bright light at the end of a tunnel seemed like the end. But for Jennifer, that end didn't carry a peaceful meaning. Despite the strange sensations in her body, she kept moving forward through the tunnel. With each step closer to the light, things began to change. At the end of the tunnel, a vague shape appeared. Jennifer wanted to see what it was, but As the silhouette became clearer, she realized it wasn't anyone she had ever seen before. It was a familiar silhouette. Her mother. But Jennifer, in shock, suddenly pulled back. Her mother was dead. Was she seeing her apparition? Or was there something more to it? Whether it was a dream or reality was uncertain. Suddenly, Jennifer began to hear whispering voices coming from the depths of a black void. She felt herself being pulled into another dimension, into an empty space. The voice. "Come, we are waiting for you," it said. As Jennifer felt the urge to step forward, she realized she had detached from her body. She found herself floating in the air as a bodiless entity. Her fear intensified, but at the same time, it felt like she had been given a chance. She had touched death, and the thought of taking that moment back, of returning to life, was stronger than any fear. But there was something, that light, the depth, the void, and that familiar voice. What were they hiding? Although Jennifer felt as though she would make the transition at any moment, something was stopping her soul from crossing into another world. Did she really want to go back? Or did the peace of that dark journey seem more appealing? Transitioning into the world of the dead wasn't easy. She had to think again. The moments that felt like eternity suddenly passed quickly. Jennifer suddenly felt her heartbeat and her body again. As her body began to come back to life, doctors and nurses hurriedly tried to restart her heart. However, Jennifer, for a while, didn't want to leave her body. She wanted to go to that peaceful place, surrounded by light. But a voice, a reminder. That light was only the beginning of a transition point. It was a chance for her to reflect on her life. When Jennifer's family saw her alive again, they were overwhelmed with joy and tears. However, when Jennifer returned to the real world, she realized something. Taking a step into death had changed her more than anything. The old Jennifer was gone. Now, the experience of being so close to death had given everything a different meaning. That light, in reality, was just the beginning of a journey. As Jennifer shared her near-death experience, she expressed that both the peace and the fear she felt were equally powerful. That experience, a blend of light and terrifying darkness, was far from a simple brain hallucination. For Jennifer, the tunnel was not just the door to death, but a passage. Her return to life had given her a new perspective on it. Death's, perhaps, our life's greatest teacher. Having returned to life, Jennifer decided to move forward more cautiously, to live each moment more fully. After all, real life was a chance for us to understand what happens after death. Story 2. The Endless Nightmare. David's Dark Stars Experience. David had always lived his life with great courage and determination. However, one morning, his life changed unexpectedly after a car accident. The vehicle flipped, and David lost consciousness, severely injured. In the ambulance, with his vision blurred and his body completely paralyzed, he felt trapped, unable to sense anything. At that moment, his heart stopped, and he began experiencing a near-death experience. When David closed his eyes, everything changed. Suddenly, he felt as though he was falling into a dark void. This darkness was unlike any emptiness he had ever encountered. The sudden erasure of everything, the absence of all sound, and the meaninglessness of what his eyes saw filled him with deep fear. But this was only the beginning. David realized he was in the middle of an infinite darkness. Stars shimmered strangely in the distance, but each of them was different. In this endless void, there were only stars and darkness. At that moment, he could not grasp the concept of time, space, his identity, or what he was supposed to do. He felt like a soul, but detached from his body. David's sensations made him feel as though he had fallen into a hellish world. The stars glowing in the dark were approaching him, but he soon realized these stars were not real stars. Were they entities forming in his mind? Were they monsters? Was he hallucinating? The stars grew larger, taking form and rapidly moving toward him. Each one transformed into a distinct, fearful figure. At that moment, David noticed the entities were slowly turning into living creatures. But David's only thought was how to escape these terrifying creatures. In that dark world where his vision was clouded and everything blurred, he was suddenly grabbed by a massive creature that tightly held his arms. In this hellish world, the creature chained him like a prisoner and stared at him menacingly. As the creature approached with a terrifying grin on its face, every breath David took intensified the dread inside him. The creature's cold, sharp gaze and its deep screams left David feeling utterly helpless. David fought desperately against the dark creatures, but he was so lost in the void that he felt as though time had stopped. Yet at the same time, he sensed that everything was temporary, and that he might get a chance to return to the real world. But in that darkness, there was one thing. A light. Yes, a light appeared. It was far away, but it was mesmerizing. He thought that in order to reach the light, he had to overcome his fear. But in that dark world, he couldn't decide whether he truly wanted to return. Was it better to move toward death and find peace, or remain trapped in that hellish dimension? David was caught in an inner dilemma. He realized that he had to make a choice. Struggling to break free from the creatures, he started moving backward. His mind suddenly sharpened, and the same fear coursed through him. Somehow David decided to move toward the light. He took a deep breath and headed for the light. As he stepped forward, he suddenly felt his body and began to return to the real world. As he moved toward the light, he could feel his heart beating faster as he moved further away from the terrifying void of death. In an instant, he was back in the hospital, and all the fear, the creatures, and the hellish environment vanished. David realized he was alive, but he still had deep questions inside. Was the light real, or was it just a hallucination? Were the creatures merely products of his mind? After this experience, David underwent a spiritual transformation. He could not forget the dark entities and the light. Although he continued his life, he would never be the same again. More than anything else, David now wondered, what truly happens after death? Story 3. In the midst of war. Michael's hellish dimension experience. Michael joined the army at a young age and served in various wars around the world. However, in 2004, an explosion in Iraq completely changed his life. That day seemed like any other military operation, but after an unexpected attack, Michael was severely injured. After the explosion, he lost consciousness and found himself on the brink of death. His body was immobile, his heart stopped, and his vision faded. But just when he thought he had died, Michael found himself in a completely different world. Upon entering this world, nothing felt familiar. There was no white light, only a dark and suffocating atmosphere. In the midst of the war, smoke rising from the ground and blinding flames surrounded him. Suddenly, he was in a hellish world. The air was thick, the ground a reddish color, and the lights were dim. Michael's soul seemed trapped in this world. The figures in the distance moved like enormous shadowy shapes, and the screams and cries from afar became more and more terrifying. At first, Michael couldn't understand what was happening, but he soon noticed everything around him slowly taking form. Large black shadows began approaching him. The sounds, sobs, and horrifying screams grew louder. For a moment, he felt like he had lost his body and began screaming in desperation. But no sound came from his mouth. He had to get out of here, but he didn't know where to go. As he moved through the dark world, every step became more terrifying. Michael could not escape the overwhelming sense of emptiness and the unnerving feeling that he might never escape. The silhouettes around him seemed to be the spirits of the friends he had lost during the war. For a moment, He remembered the many losses he had suffered in the real world, and his vision blurred. He was truly on the edge of death, but this world felt like a hellish place. And then, Michael felt a deep voice calling to him. "Come." The voice was deep, metallic, and haunting. He was being summoned from a place he thought he could never escape. A figure began to appear behind the voice. It was a huge, dark entity, following every one of his steps. Michael felt more and more terrified with each movement of the figure. But somehow he managed to move backward. As everything intertwined, he began to question his very existence. Was he truly alive? Or had he passed beyond death? This dark dimension felt like an eternal prison. Suddenly, the figure approached, disappearing into the darkness, trying to pull Michael into an endless void. A mental battle began within him. Finally, he realized that everything inside him was a mixture of doubt, and it seemed impossible to escape. But then, he noticed a light. However, this light wasn't as encouraging as the one he saw before. Behind the light was a large, terrifying shadow. Michael took a step toward the light, making one final effort to return to the real world. In his mind, he heard a voice telling him to return. But as he moved toward the light, the dark shadow's hand tried to pull him back. Michael somehow kept moving toward the light, and finally, with a scream, opened his eyes. In the hospital room, Michael woke up with pain throughout his body. He couldn't forget what he had experienced in that dark world. Was the hellish dimension a dream, or had he really been trapped in that world? The spirits of those he had lost in the war and the dark entities still lingered in his mind. He returned to his life, but the fear and the hellish experience never left him. Michael spent the rest of his life appreciating every moment, knowing he was the only one to escape that dark world. But still, he lived with the fear that one day, the gates of hell might open again. And so, the terrifying truths that come from beyond death. As we listen to the words of those who have lived through them, we begin to question if death is truly an end, or perhaps just another beginning. So, what truly lies beyond the other side? And how do the secrets brought back from the dead affect the living? This video is just the beginning of uncovering those secrets. If you dare to venture deeper into the dark, join us for another video here on Echoes from the Dark. Remember, death is not always an end. Sometimes it is just the beginning. The darkness is always waiting for you. If you want to stay with us on this eerie journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment. Share your thoughts and ideas with us, as each comment helps us go deeper into this dark journey. Get ready, because in our next video, we will be revealing even more terrifying secrets. Double asterisk.